our board. He is our leading thinker on cryptocurrencies, and he's going to give us an introduction. So, thank you very much for coming in.
All right.
I'm going to ask you 4 times. And it's now over to you.
Thank you. Does anyone know how this works?
You put it
Is
on
it
your
turned
ear.
on?
It's already on. Yeah.
So it goes on my lapel or on my ear?
Ear.
No, you're an expert with this.
It's too high tech for me.
No way to sort of.
Is it on?
Yeah, it's on. It's on.
It's kind of straight as well.
So that thing goes in your ear. Okay, you're right here. Right. Test. Is it working?
Yeah, you want to hook this bit on.
I might not even need this though.
We've got one guy on the phone.
Yeah, we're broadcasting to Sam.
Is it on?
Yeah, you can.
Can you hear?
Yeah.
It doesn't sound any different to me.
Yeah, but you can see here there's little green bars being the sounds coming through. So when you talk,
Test 1, 2, 3.
it's moving.
All right. All right, let's talk normal. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for devoting 45 minutes of your day to this talk. It's hard to see everyone at the same time, so I'm going to stand back over here. But what I wanted to do today is, do about 40 minutes of an overview, which I'm calling Bitcoin privacy and the crypto arms race. So to give you an overview of the current topics that I was talking about, I'm also delivering a similar presentation at the Shard next Monday at the Warwick Business School. So they invited me to do a presentation there. So this is like my warm-up routine to get ready for that. And the reason I waited so long, Joe, is because you had to have a sufficient audience. And so I expect to talk for about 40 minutes. And if you could reserve your questions for the end, there's definitely going to be a time where I would love to entertain questions. That's the most informative for me. So I get the most benefit out of what questions come from everyone. So there's varying degrees of Bitcoin expertise in the room here. I'm not really going to pay attention to that. I'm just going to talk about my subject matter. So since there's a short time period, it will, probably blaze through some things that aren't familiar to you. But don't worry, you can ask at the end, or you can ask somebody else. Does anyone here know how I got involved with BitGame Labs and Cloudbed Engine 10 in the first place?
No idea.
Okay, well, let me give you a little bit of that background so that you know why I'm even here. I'm one of the original founding board directors for BitGame Labs, or Game Theory Research, and the brand Cloudbed. Going back to 2012, I was one of the only people writing in Forbes magazine about Bitcoin, and I would just pick subject matters to write about. One of the interesting topics back then was gaming, and how Bitcoin was being used as a digital casino chip in gaming. Even today, about 40%, 30 or 40% of the daily transaction volume in Bitcoin is related to gaming. I wrote an article for Forbes, and you can look this up. You can even Google it using my last name, Jiten, and the word win poker, if you remember win poker. So it goes back to the days pre-Cloudbet when Jiten was working on win poker. And I didn't know who he was. I just randomly wrote about the article because it was a brilliant business model. And I wanted to highlight a business model in gaming that was related to Bitcoin. So the article came out, had a lot of views. People were talking about it in Bitcoin. And then, Jiten rang me up and said he was interested in expanding the concept beyond poker into a broader gaming area. So, of course, I was interested in it. I had a lot of ideas on how to run the treasury, on how to focus on just a Bitcoin-only gaming operation, Bitcoin in, Bitcoin out, no bank accounts needed. So it was an instant match. The very next month, I think he flew out here with Andy and a few other people to London, and I believe it was for ICE. I don't remember which year, probably 2000. 2013, ICE. So we flew out here, we had dinner, we solidified the concept then. Jiten went out and brought in some other investors and formed the board. So that's how it started. That's what my involvement has been. I've been with the company ever since then. So I saw it grow from like 5 people in Hong Kong to what it is now, which is great to see. And we all have different ideas on where we'd like it to go. But one of the things that I'm constantly promoting as one of the board directors is that we need to focus on our core strengths, which differentiates us from the competition, which is the cryptocurrency angle. So we don't need to go out and try to be the best in fiat because there's already a lot of other players in that space. We can be the best in the cryptocurrency angle and gambling with cryptocurrency. We can maintain the edge and be number one in that space, which will be a lot easier to do than trying to go into the fiat world. Because eventually the fiat mainstream providers are going to be looking for acquisition targets. So either we get big or we get bought. Those are the two exit plans. Okay, so that's my connection with BGL. My background really is in payments. So I was the original foreign exchange trader at Visa International. So when you use your Visa card overseas and you have an exchange rate conversion, I was the one who put that rate in, which was a lot of fun because I got to put in my own rates when I traveled. I came back and I said, well, where did I go? Okay, well, I'm gonna put a good rate in for this clearing. So it was really a fun game. It allowed me to build a trading department. My background's in finance, in banking and derivatives. And then in 2012, we launched the Bitcoin Foundation. The Bitcoin Foundation was a nonprofit association, trade association, devoted to promoting Bitcoin. So we did a lot of PR, we did a lot of education of government, and we also paid the core developers. So there was nobody paying the core developers back then. And part of the reason that the community wanted the developers to be paid was because they were volunteers. We didn't want them to have to go out and get other day jobs, and we didn't want them to be under contract from foreign governments or any other outside influence that would have an impact on their development work. So because the Bitcoin Foundation was paying these core developers, we, as the foundation, made them also sign a contract with us that had to reveal and disclose any other form of compensation they were receiving. I guess it was a little bit of the honor system, but we then knew who else was compensating them. And that was 2012, 13, 14. Around 2015, it started to shift and become more like Linux, where every company would, not every company, because Coinbase still doesn't, but every company would devote a little bit of their budget and development talent to working on the Bitcoin core protocol. And Linux does this very well. You'll have positions within software companies where the guy's only hired because his full-time job is to contribute code back to open source Linux. So then the funding need for the Bitcoin Foundation went away. We didn't want to be a lobbying organization. And there was disagreement at the time on whether we would be full-time government lobbying or we would be a legal defense organization for companies and individuals that were being prosecuted and put in jail for Bitcoin-related, Bitcoin-related offenses. I was on the side that wanted it to be a legal defense organization, similar to the EFF, but I didn't have the broad support of the board to be able to do that. So the positions rotated, and because there were elections, new people became elected into the foundation, and my focus at that point was to work on Bitcoin-related startups at the board level. So ever since then, I've been working with about 6 or 7 startups, only in the Bitcoin space, Bitcoin blockchain space, where I either contribute capital or work as a board director. It was amazing because the day that I left the foundation, I also coincidentally had an interview on Bloomberg TV, which was over here on Finsbury, Bloomberg London, and I announced it on the TV. The interviewer on Bloomberg asked me, why I was leaving the foundation. And I said that I wanted to pursue for-profit opportunities because I was tired of the nonprofit world. So never lose a great opportunity to resign, because when you resign on TV like that, all these companies start calling you. So I made some notes of what I want to talk about. And this will also help you, I think, as you go to holiday. If any of you went for Christmas holidays to your family and they asked you what you did, and you said Bitcoin, they either knew it or they got this glazed look on their face, and they always pointed at you and told the other relatives, you know, that's the Bitcoin geek there, and they make fun of you. And this goes on every year at holidays, because explaining it to your friends and family is probably one of the hardest things, because it crosses over into the investment world, and you don't want to give investment advice to your family, because it's never a win situation. You only have downside in giving investment advice to your family. But the most important thing is if you can repeat the story of Bitcoin and how to explain it. When people come up to me at parties and stuff and say, oh, I want to get into Bitcoin, how do I get one Bitcoin? I'm just so confused by everything. You know, I don't really want to help them. I don't really care. And the reason I don't care is because discovering Bitcoin and financial sovereignty is a personal journey. If you need somebody to hold your hand, then you're not the right person to be taking that step, especially with your own money. It's a personal journey, because it's only going to make sense if you do your own personal research. So the only thing that people can give you as advice is where to go for that personal research. What things to look for, but not to connect the dots and say, why should you get out of the fiat world? Why should you move 80 or 90% of your net worth over to cryptocurrencies? They're not going to get that, and they're not going to understand it unless they take their own personal journey. So I think it begins with an understanding of why Bitcoin has a price in the first place. So just for this talk today, let's forget about Ethereum and Bitcoin Cash and Craig Coin and, you know, all the other ones that are out there. Doge, there's like 2,000. So let's just think about Bitcoin, because it'll make it a lot easier. Why does Bitcoin have a price to begin with in the first place? Because that confuses people right out of the gate. Does anyone know why it has a price? Not what the price is. No, because it's not really money yet at that point.
You guess people believe that this?
Well, that's what keeps it up, yeah. But the reason it has a price to begin with is because it's a network protocol, and you need to have the token as the incentive to mine the next block. Because in the beginning, we only had block 0, which is the Genesis block. After block 0 was block 1. Nobody would have cared about block 1 if they didn't get something for it. But what they got as a reward for block 1 was 50 Bitcoin. In 2020, it's going to be going down to 6.25. But it was 50 Bitcoin originally when they mined block 1. So that initial incentive mechanism is why Bitcoin has a price. So it's not a product. It's a protocol in the same way that TCP/IP is a protocol, or SMTP for email, or HTTP. If you could invest in 1995, you know, over 20 years ago, into HTTP or TCP, let's just say that you could have bought like a TCP token. You would have been, you'd be fabulously happy right now, because you would have picked the dominant protocol for the internet backbone. But back then, when TCP was fighting it out with everyone else, it wasn't known that TCP/IP would be the winner. There were all these other competing protocols. And there was only room for one to survive that we built the internet on. And it's the same thing with SMTP. It's simple mail transport protocol. So that's what drives all of our email. But when that was being formed, there's like 12 or 13 other email protocols. Why didn't they all survive? Well, because you didn't want to call up somebody on the phone and say, well, what email protocol are you on? I'm about to send you an email. So the world has to converge to a single protocol. So Bitcoin can be thought of as a value transfer protocol, the same way that SMTP is a simple mail transport protocol. And if the world converges on a single protocol, there's not a lot of room for other protocols there. There might be a room for other ERC20 and shitcoin tokens as products, but not as network protocols that you could invest in. So buying Bitcoin, and the reason Bitcoin has a price is similar to if you would have been able to buy a TCP token or or an email token back then. And that's a big difference. There's some VCs that grasp that. And that's why not only do they invest in Bitcoin companies, but they also invest in Bitcoin because they want to hold it as an asset. Okay, so just a little bit on the early days of Bitcoin when, with block 0 and going to block, 1400 or something. Those early days were, the people who were attracted to Bitcoin were libertarians and crypto geeks. They weren't finance people and economists, and they didn't really care about the value. It was interesting that it had, that there was a token associated with, some way to mine the next block, and they got all these tokens. They had 25,000 of them. They didn't really care because they were interested in the concept from a crypto libertarian perspective of being able to have digital cash to cash exchange that wasn't controlled by the central bank. So it was decentralized. And the biggest advance that they were so happy about and what drove the innovation was not any of the protocols within Bitcoin, because a lot of those Bitcoin protocols were, the primitives have been around for over 20 years, some cases over 30 years. But nobody had ever done it before with decentralized trust, so that it hit a blockchain and you didn't have to go back to an authority anywhere to validate the coin. So the biggest precursor to Bitcoin that was actually implemented was called DigiCash, and it came from David Chaum in Amsterdam, late 80s, early 90s. Actually, the paperwork that he did on it was early 80s. With that digital cash protocol, it had most of the attributes of Bitcoin without the decentralized validation. So if you set up a digital cash bank, or mint, they call them DigiCash mints, you always had to send the transaction back to the mint to see if it had been double spent. If it had not been double spent, the mint sent you fresh tokens back, and you could use those fresh tokens. So the glitch in that system was, well, there's an issuing mint. You always have to go back to the issuing mint. That's a potential point of corruption, a potential point of shutdown. Because even if DigiCash was successful, you always had that one point. So if the issuing mint was a large bank, governments could shut down a large bank. You shut down the issuing mint. It's not, it might be digital cash, it might be cryptocurrency, but it's not decentralized. And if it's not decentralized, then it's not survivable. So if Bitcoin could have been shut down, which it can't now, but if it could have been shut down in the earlier days, that would have been the best time, because every day that goes by, it gets stronger and stronger and more difficult to shut down. You basically have to shut down the whole internet. Okay, so I always like to focus on the similarities between Bitcoin and paper cash, because nothing is really changing in your wallet. This is another good conversation to have with people that you might be at the holiday dinner and they say, well, it's only money launderers and drug people that are using Bitcoin. Why are you involved in this scam? Well, people have cash in their pocket. You have 20-pound notes, 50-pound notes. Bitcoin doesn't give you any more than you already have with paper cash. Because with paper cash, you have privacy, you have the anonymity, you have the untraceability, except for the camera, maybe at the ATM. But you have the untraceability, and you have the payment finality. There's no reversals. So the three things, privacy, untraceability, and irreversibility. We already have those with paper cash. Bitcoin doesn't introduce anything beyond those. So why is everybody all going crazy about Bitcoin? Well, because the government authorities around the world are trying to squeeze cash transactions. They keep reducing the amount of legal cash transactions you're allowed to do. In Spain now, I think it's down to 1,500 euro. Anything over that for purchasing has to be done through a bank transfer, a bank draft, a credit card. Can't do cash transactions above a certain amount. And that keeps getting squeezed and squeezed and squeezed. Governments promote the cashless society as a utopia, but the cashless society is more like a dystopia. It's more like V for Vendetta. It's not going to be pretty, because when cash goes away and they kill cash, everything you do is on your debit card or your bank, and anybody anywhere, local government, world government, can get a printout of everything you do. So think of all those unique private transactions that you even still do today with cash that would go away if cash went away. Well, fortunately, Bitcoin comes along just at the right time and allows you to keep those same three attributes that we all today enjoy with our paper cash, but we're allowed to keep those in the digital world when cash is killed and wiped out. And that's amazing right there, to be able to have that, to be able to keep those three attributes for freedom, for financial freedom and financial sovereignty, that are being wiped out by the squeeze on paper cash. Okay, so I'm an economist by training, so it always comes back to the three functions of money when I'm talking about Bitcoin as money, because the three functions of money that you all learn in Econ 101 are store value, medium of exchange, and unit of account. Those are the three functions of money. And the Bank of England does the best job of this in describing Bitcoin from a monetary perspective compared to any other central bank. The Bank of England does the best job on it, and they have two good research reports that were published in 2014 that you can get. I would encourage you to read both of them. But they correctly describe the progression of how Bitcoin evolves from the genesis to actually becoming money. And it's not there yet. We're not there yet. Because the final stage is when you see goods and services priced in Bitcoin. You see salaries, rent, goods at the store, priced in Bitcoin, not where you have to go in and convert, but the actual label on the shelf. So the three phases, and they all go in this progressive order. It starts with store value. Store value, which means that not stability of value, not safe haven value, but just store value. So that if you give it to someone, the recipient knows that they can do something else with it. But there's something there. And then after store value is medium of exchange. It's not used as a medium of exchange until there's a store value. So think of something like a paper cup or a pencil. They're not going to be mediums of exchange because there's no store value there, and there's no store value there because there's no scarcity. So until you can get to medium of exchange, you have to have store value. And the transaction that best described this and demonstrated it was, the pizza transaction for 2 pepperoni pizzas for 10,000 Bitcoin. It was the guy in Florida who wanted really hungry for pepperoni pizza. He said, "I'll pay 10,000 Bitcoin for 2 pizzas." Somebody in London, this is true, picked up the phone, ordered 2 pizzas for the guy in Florida, and got the 10,000 Bitcoin. So now it's like, what, $71 million pizza for 2? That proved that, and as being the first recorded public transaction like that, it proved that he at least knew that for that 10,000, he would, in strong likelihood, be able to go and get 2 pizzas himself. Because at that point, it crossed over from store value to medium of exchange. And more and more of those transactions started to happen where the value got pegged. First value was obviously under even a penny, like 0.6 of a cent when it was traded. Some of the early Mt. Gox transactions were 6 cents. people would write about a rally that happened from 6 cents to 10 cents. It was like this massive, big story. You know, Bitcoin jumped 4 cents, which was over 50%, because it went from 6 cents to 10 cents. So it was big news because we were just starting to find out what the value was of Bitcoin. And then the final stage, this is how you'll know it's complete, is when you go from medium of exchange to unit of account. That's when goods and services are priced in Bitcoin or in the unit of account, the numeraire. Now, we're a long ways off from that. We're probably just at the beginning of the medium of exchange phase. People will even question that and say we're still at the store value phase. But when we get to the unit of account phase, UAE, where things are priced that way, it's going to be way too late from an investment angle because it's already going to be so widely adopted that the investment opportunity at that point would have been gone. But that doesn't matter because you have to just start thinking in terms, it's not when should I cash out my Bitcoin into pound sterling. It's when should I cash out my pound sterling into Bitcoin. And you flip that thinking around, and what you keep as your nucleus of core holdings is something other than fiat. So you're not cashing out. Why would you ever cash out back into fiat if you don't believe in fiat? So that's the principle of cloud. So I forgot where I was for a second. Yeah, so those are the three functions of money. And the other clue, this is an investment clue, so I am giving you investment advice here. And it has to do with the 3-digit currency code. Right now for the pound, it's GBP. We use USD for the dollar. The yen is JPY. It's always the first 2 letters of that code, which is an ISO standard, represent the country of issuance. So Japan, JP, Japan. The Y is the yen. So the third character represents the first letter of the currency. That's why pound is GBP. Euro, I don't know how they got that one, but you go through every country and you'll see that that's the format. It's the ISO 4217 currency code. It's in the ATMs, it's in accounting packages, it's in all of this financial statement software, airlines, everybody is using this data tape. So the investment clue for when Bitcoin is really going to take off, blow past 100,000 or 200,000 per coin, is when you start seeing that currency code being adopted for Bitcoin. And it's only beginning right now. It's XBT, and it's used on Reuters. It's used on Bloomberg. It's used on any of the currency apps that you can get on your phone. XBT. So when I was at the foundation, we petitioned the ISO to include XBT as an official currency code. And we said, X is what you have reserved for non-country issuers because there's no country. So we're going to use X. And then BT because it's Bitcoin. So we proposed XBT. Bhutan, we couldn't do BTC because that was Bhutan. BT is Bhutan. So they said, no way, you're not going to do BTC. So we did XBT. They processed it for about 4 or 5 weeks, came back to us with a letter and said, we cannot approve your request and application for XBT currency code because the application needs to be submitted by the central bank issuer. So then we had to go back into the very beginning of the story, tell them how there's no issue, blah, blah, blah. By this time, I just got so sick of it. We decided not to pay for the next application fee, which was like, $2,000 or something. So we just said, forget it, but it doesn't really matter because the apps on your phone are using it de facto. So it's been adopted in the marketplace de facto that it's XBT. If you're comparing it to the other currency codes, you'll still see BTC as slang, but XBT is the official pending. It's been pending for like 6 years, pending ISO code. So the investment advice that I'm giving you is that when you see that finally get adopted officially and ratified by ISO as a currency standard, that's how you know that Bitcoin's going to shoot to the moon. So don't even wait the next day. Just buy it that day when you see it get adopted and ratified as XBT. Okay, so that's the story of XBT. I want to talk about fungibility because fungibility as an economic term, is confusing to a lot of people, but it's critical for the future of Bitcoin. Fungibility refers to the idea of mutual substitution, which means that if I give you a 20-pound note, you can give that 20-pound note to somebody else, and they can give it to somebody else, and they're all just the same. Every 20-pound note is unique, or is mutually substitutable. So they're all the same. They might have different serial numbers, but it doesn't stop you from using them in the same way. With Bitcoin, there are attacks on fungibility. So when you see things like people trying to do blockchain forensics or trying to trace blockchain transactions, what they're trying to do is very similar to if someone was going to track the serial number of your pound sterling banknote, because they want to know where it came from and where it's going to. And if they can determine that, then they can, they can reclaim. They can stop people who are using pounds for illegitimate things. This is what they believe. They can stop people. They can catch criminals who were either laundering money or who were stealing cash, because it's traceable. We'd never be able to use it. But then, if they break that down, that fundamentally breaks a monetary system, because there's a lot of innocent people along the way that would accept that pound note, and they would go to the bank and say, I want to deposit this, and the bank would say, well, your pound note is blacklisted. We noticed that where you got your pound note from like 4 hops ago was a drug dealer, over in Hackney. I'll pick on Hackney. So 4 hops, they'll look at your banknote. Well, this is what they're doing with Bitcoin transactions, because it's digital, it's easier to do. Coinbase, as an exchange, looks 4 hops back to make sure you didn't get any online casino money. And they're even looking 4 hops forward to make sure you don't use Bitcoin in a bad way. So 4 hops back, 4 hops forward. So destroying fungibility is going to lead to the end of the coin usage in the monetary sphere. But don't worry, because we have privacy protocols. And privacy protocols is where we get into this arms race. So the authorities and the sniffers and the trackers do one thing, the privacy wallets, they up the game and they do another. So it's kind of like a real arms race. In the nuclear war, in the nuclear standoff, they get 1,200 missiles, we get 1,300. You keep going higher and higher. We are in that arms race now with Bitcoin. Because the wallet that used to do 4-hop mixing now has to go to do 5-hop mixing. So they can obfuscate the transaction for 5 hops to prevent the people who were tracing it based on 4 hops. And you can see where this leads. Pretty soon 19, 20, 21 hops, and not just in ricochet and mixing methods, but in other areas of blacklisting and traceability. Blacklisting is where an exchange will publish a list of coin addresses, not specific maybe to your coin, but any kind of taint that is in any of your coin balance will be blacklisted. So let's say that you have 1 Bitcoin in your wallet, but 10% or less of that Bitcoin is comprised of other coins that made it to this taint list and are tainting your coins. Well, those are blacklisted. And the exchange could come out and say, well, these are blacklisted, we're not accepting those. The government could mandate it in a list, and you're not going to accept those coins because they're blacklisted. Well, that's where fungibility ends. So my premise is that you have to keep coin mixing alive to be able to keep Bitcoin alive. So coin mixing and coin laundering are not bad terms. They're not illegal things to do just because it has the word launder in it. There was an early site called Bitcoin Laundry, and for a fee, it would just mix your coins. give you back new coins. But the government didn't like it because it was like, oh, this is laundry, this is like a money laundromat. But they used the wrong word when they called it Bitcoin laundry. But essentially what you're doing is you're mixing your coins in a premeditated way to return coins to you that have either a cleaner history or no history at all because maybe they're virgin coins. So you want to de-link your coin holdings from any kind of past that would consider to be tainted or blacklisted or whatever. Now, what is going to happen in the evolution of this crypto arms race is that we're going to start having wallets that automatically by default do all of this for you. So you don't have to sit there and plan methodically how you're going to craft a transaction that doesn't violate anything or making sure you have clean Bitcoin. The wallet will do that for you automatically. You're starting to see this already in the marketplace with wallets like Wasabi Wallet, Samurai Wallet, a focus on privacy, and they're called privacy wallets. It's a massive big space that's going to be developing because privacy by default is what's going to save and protect Bitcoin fungibility. So I'm not advocating to do coin laundering because I want to help the money launderers. That's not a very good position to take if you're out there speaking in public. I want to promote Bitcoin coin laundering. No, I want to promote fungibility and Bitcoin coin mixing, which is an economic necessity and prerequisite to fungibility and the survival of a token payment system. Because I'll give you a story. Suppose you're somebody out in Surrey and your son is mowing the lawn for the neighbor. He's mowing the lawn for this neighbor guy, but the neighbor guy is like, some big mafia kingpin, gets all his money from illegal things. And he pays your son like, 40 pounds to mow the lawn every week. Well, your son gets the money, gets the 40 pounds for mowing the lawn, think he's doing a good job, but he can't go and spend it because those notes from that mafia guy were blacklisted. How's that going to work? If everybody has to check the history multiple hops back for every time they accept a payment. Okay, it's not going to work. So that's why it's a war that we're in. That's why it's an arms race. And the people who are on the side of Bitcoin privacy and fungibility, they have to win this race. They have to win this arms race, or else it's a very dark V for Vendetta future. So, okay. So coin mixers are good. Bitcoin laundries are good. Blockchain forensics is bad because it's trying to kill fungibility. So blockchain forensics is used by law enforcement. We even have a model at Big Game Labs that is used for this. And a lot of companies that started out in blockchain, the biggest one I think is Chainalysis. They went out and they do this business now for law enforcement on Chainalysis. But what that's going to lead to is a system of dual exchange rates. So if it's actually successful where you can blacklist certain Bitcoin, what's going to happen is that you'll destroy the payment system, but you'll also lead to dual exchange rates like we did see in places like Argentina. There's one rate that's the official rate, and then you have the black market rate. So no matter what happens to Bitcoin in terms of blacklisting and blocking, you're always going to be able to go out to localbitcoins.com, go down to a cafe here, and you'll be able to exchange, buy and sell Bitcoin for fiat at a black market rate. So advocating Chainalysis and governments pushing blockchain businesses into this direction is only going to push things like Bitcoin into the black market. It's going to push it underground. So it's not going to kill it. It's not going to make it go away. It's just going to push it into the dark market, which will be way harder to regulate. So I believe that it needs to be managed above ground, not drive it underground, and allowed to operate like the paper cash system that we have now. So we'll see how that goes. And I will just leave it at that to see if you have any questions. Question?
Does anyone want to start?
You do, Tiago, if you want to start.
Okay, so yeah, I have quite a few here. I mean, not trying to be short, but in any case, some of the privacy ones and the mechanisms that are being put in place to actually avoid it. I mean, you mentioned Samurai for one. I'd like to hear taking the Google Play one, just made actually they kind of blocked Samurai from implementing it. Samurai actually took off quote privacy, the transaction, private transaction, and other two features in privacy because Google Play was kind of prohibiting. How do you see that kind of censorship, not by governments, but by like the companies, and how does that affect?
Okay, let me answer that, because what Samurai did was only they neutered 3 features, but they weren't all of the privacy features. They were just some of the ways that they that you logged in or hid from Google the fact that you even had a wallet installed, like stealth mode. So yeah, that's a bad move, and but it was a free market move, you know, because Google, in a free market, Google would do that anyway, and Apple is way ahead of them on that. So my response to it, because I did follow that story, is that if you looked at Samurai's response, they committed themselves to distributing the app through other channels, so that you're not just reliant on Google Play and iStore. Because Google Play and iStore do have a very strong position in the mobile app market right now. So if we believe everything's going to your mobile phone, those are 2 major gatekeepers. So you either have to get your APK, your app file from an independent source and verify the hashes, or you have to go and what's it called, jailbreaking your iPhone. So I'm an Android user, so I'm not that familiar with Apple, but if I were an Apple user, I'd pretty much have a jailbroken phone. I can't see any other way. But that's not good though. If you have to go that route to just run the app that you want to run. So I think it opens the door for a third way, which is, and I'd be interested in your take on it as well, but I think there's going to be room there for another way, a popular way to distribute apps to the mass market, because eventually the market's just not going to tolerate everything running through Google and Apple. It's worse than that, actually, because Google and Apple are both US companies. The app developers have to agree to certain encryption regulations, and they have to agree to certain things that the US government dictates, because those are both US companies. And so I'm working with a wallet provider who has to conform to all these things just because they want to go through those two venues.
And just
that's my answer.
all right.
We've got questions from the phone lines here as well. You might do repeat these so that people on the phone can hear.
Oh yeah.
Go ahead. Question 1 is, what is your opinion of decentralized cryptocurrency exchanges? Strengths, weaknesses, support in the community?
Okay, the question is about decentralized exchanges. So I'll answer that. Decentralized, I'll describe it first though, because decentralized exchanges are where you're able to do a peer-to-peer transaction of either crypto to crypto or crypto to fiat without having an intermediary like a typical exchange. It's much easier to do with crypto to crypto than it is with crypto to fiat. In the crypto to crypto space, Shapeshift was making a lot of money on offering this decentralized exchange service to wallet providers that had no other way of monetizing their wallet. So there's a wallet called Jaxx, Jaxx, and they were probably the biggest partner of Shapeshift in steering their user wallet base to Shapeshift to be able to do this kind of decentralized exchange. And the pros of it are that you can do it with being, anonymous, unregistered user. So you didn't have to register your name and address and passport to be able to do this type of exchange. Those are the pros. Now, it's still, the technology behind it is not that developed, and it still needs to develop further. So I think decentralized exchanges have a great future, but I think it's a number of years off because the technology and the code is still being evolved. BISC is out there, BISQ. So they would probably dispute that it hasn't been solved, but there's a lot more that needs to be done in that area. And I think that for the smaller transactions, it's going in that direction. There will always be a need for centralized exchanges, though, because if Bitcoin's adopted into the mainstream world, people are not going to put 100,000, 200,000 worth of exchanges through a decentralized exchange. In my opinion, I think for those higher amounts, they're not going to mind doing the KYC. So there's a place for decentralized exchanges. I think it's in the smaller transaction area.
Question 2 of 3. How do you see the legal/regulatory aspects of cryptocurrencies playing out if they become a big enough threat to national currencies?
Okay, the question, I'll repeat it, is about legal aspects of cryptocurrencies challenging traditional currencies.
Yeah, how do you see the legal aspects of cryptocurrencies or regulatory aspects playing out? Like what's going to happen? I think the question is hinting at, do you think cryptocurrencies will be regulated, perhaps even out of existence, if they become a threat to national currencies?
Yeah, like can it be too successful for its own good?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I don't think that cryptocurrencies are going to be a replacement for legal tender fiat currencies. I think they're going to exist side by side. They're going to challenge legal tender fiat currencies. They're going to keep them honest the same way that gold would keep them honest from overissuance. So it's going to be more of a competitive atmosphere, which is a positive, because if the inflation on the fiat side becomes so obvious and so apparent, then cryptocurrencies are doing their job. They're instilling some honesty and discipline into the fiat legal tender side. So they're not going to compete. In my view, they're going to exist side by side. But more importantly, over time, the legal tender centrally issued currencies are going to become less and less relevant. So the world that is going to drive us into the future is on the cryptocurrency side. So there's going to be a parallel economy. So the parallel economy that develops on the cryptocurrency side is going to be so much larger and so much more based on free enterprise and so much more successful from a P&L side that over time, the mainstream legal tender side will become less relevant. So it'll tend to go away or shrink on its own. And you don't need to sit there and worry about, well, do we make Bitcoin legal tender to replace those? It's going to naturally grow through this concept of the parallel economy. And the first target on the parallel economy hit list is the entire cash economy. I don't know if you guys watch TED, but if you do watch TED, there's a great TED talk from about 5 or 6 years ago called The Informal Economy. The informal economy is the market-based economy, the markets that you see in the squares in Africa and Asia, and 30% of Italy, 20% of Spain. It's all these markets that happen on the weekends where people are doing cash-to-cash transactions, and there's no VAT. People love shopping there because there's no VAT. People love selling there because there's no VAT. The cops are there to keep the peace. They're not there to tax. So this TED Talk was about the informal economy all around the world. And if you add all that up and all the commerce that goes through that, it's a $10 trillion economy per year, $10 trillion economy, which makes it number 2 economy in the world after the US, is the cash-based informal economy. That's Bitcoin's first target market as it drives this parallel economy. And it has so many advantages for the participants in this informal economy. CloudBet's in the informal economy. So we're in the informal economy right now. We're part of the GDP of the informal economy. The only step next to take is me convincing Andy that we need to keep our books in Bitcoin. He's going to say, well, we only have 2 digits. Well, we need 8 digits for Bitcoin accounting in QuickBooks. So that's when the informal economy is successful, when you're keeping your books in Bitcoin. But think of the security though. Like I was in Colombia for a talk, and Colombia is a beautiful place. I love it there. And the president of Colombia was doing a talk right before me, staying in the same hotel. So we had 200 machine gun guys on the top of the hotel. We had all the guards leading up to the driveway to the hotel. And I called my wife and I said, you know, I'm either in the most secure place or the least secure place. There's a lot of machine guns here. And so the reason I thought of that is because in Colombia, they're trying to get Bitcoin out to these cash merchants because they're using the business case that if they hold their daily revenue in Bitcoin, they're not going to be robbed. When you're doing everything in cash, let's say you sold a lot of baskets during the day, you're going to be robbed before you go home because you're holding all the cash. But if it's going right into your Bitcoin wallet, you know, you're just putting it in your long-term storage. You're not going to, you know, there's a safety issue there. So that's how Bitcoin Colombia was promoting Bitcoin to merchants, and just replicate that through the informal economy. So what's 3 of 3? I'm really curious now.
I think I've answered this one actually. It's do you think we'll see Bitcoin maintain its position as the most popular, most valuable cryptocurrency over, say, Mimblewimble?
Yeah.
Interesting question. Monero, or other future currencies that may improve on the technology?
Okay, these are very good questions. I just started a. Do I need to repeat that question?
Yes, I think
okay. So the question is about the privacy coins specifically, like Mimblewimble, which is Grin, maybe Bean. I like Grin better than Bean.
Yeah, Bean crashed actually 2 days ago.
Yeah, I saw that. Monero, Dash, and you know, a handful of others. Monero's used to be doing quite well. And are they going to overtake Bitcoin? That's the question. I recently started a new client project for a company called Cypherpunk Holdings in Canada. So it's actually a listed company on the Canadian Stock Exchange, and the call symbol is HODL, H-O-D-L, if you want to look it up. And their mission is to invest in privacy-related technologies. So they have a portfolio that's 50-50. They invest in privacy-related startups. The other 50% of their portfolio, they invest in privacy coins, such as Grin, Monero, Zcash, Dash, those things. So I'm kind of like the agitator on those board meetings because I'm trying to steer them away from putting money into the coin space. And the reason I'm doing that is because I think that they're more of an experiment playground. These privacy coins, no doubt they have great technology, but they all have certain faults. You can go back to the trusted setup with Zcash, and you know, they all have their faults, but they're great at experimentation. So they're testing concepts in the market for what can easily be adopted into Bitcoin if the Bitcoin wants to adopt its core protocol. So think of them as a test bed for eventually getting into Bitcoin. And the reason that I'm so confident in that is that it's not always the best technology that wins the game. So Monero or Grin may be technically superior to Bitcoin in a technical way, the way that you know, Betamax was superior to VHS for tapes and things like that. But the one who wins is the one who has the largest network effect. And the network effect is the pervasiveness of the developer community behind it, the people who are using it, the one that's on the most exchanges, that has the most wallets. That momentum is very, very difficult to overcome. It would be like a challenger taking on TCP/IP right now. What are you going to say? We'll yank out your TCP and we're going to put, you know, it's very, very hard once you get that network effect. So the privacy coins, despite excellent technology, they're going to head into this network effect, which means they'll always have like a small, limited niche market, but they won't ever be able to overtake the coin that does have the network effect advantage. It would have to actually work the other way around. The coin that has the network effect advantage would have to voluntarily slip or lose or mess up for one of the other ones to take its place. That doesn't mean I'm against the Mimblewimble or any of the technologies they're promoting. Mimblewimble tried to get it in the Bitcoin core protocol. Because it didn't happen, they went to other avenues. Same thing with Zcash. The people who developed Zero Cash initially wanted it in the Bitcoin Core protocol. You know, even Vitalik with Ethereum wanted it in Bitcoin protocol. So when you don't get it, then you go and start your own coin. But they're not all going to end up like Ethereum.
Regarding that, just so I get the hook. Yeah, I agree with you in a lot of aspects, and of course, Bitcoin's got the network effect. But one question, and it's something I don't have an opinion on, so I'm not trying to push an agenda here. What if we're looking at it from the wrong perspective? I know that TCP/IP and SMTP and all these protocols, the communication protocols over there can be only one. Is sort of a very good way of putting it.
But that's not a rule. That's just the way it goes.
But I mean, when it comes to currencies and with the attribution of trust over that shared language, which is currency, how about what if we're especially with the advancements of DAX and also the second layer solutions such as Lightning and other atomic swap tools that are automating it, like equality. How about the future? What if the future is not one coin to rule them all? What if it is like the way we actually kind of seeing it's being configured right now, a bunch of niches that are tied together by a sea of infinite liquidity generated by but this is just food for thought. I'd like to know what you think.
Yeah, well, you know, follow the market cap for one thing, because you know, it's going to be driven by market cap of where the value is stored. Where are the investors placing their protocol storage, or their you know, backing behind the hash rate. So things like what you're talking about, where there's atomic swaps and other coins. I'm not saying that they're going to go away. I agree with you that they're going to be niche competitors. But they're going to be in this experimentation. They're always going to have a limit on their natural growth, I believe, because they're taking on the #1 network effect. It's like the analogy would be if you were to start a new language and try to challenge English. Because, you know, there used to be like 8,000 different languages, and we're converging now to 4,000, 3,000. There's going to pretty soon be like 100 languages. So you're taking on, there's not value in keeping 10,000 different languages, because it harms our ability to intercommunicate. So if you were to go out and start a language that competes with English, that's kind of like what these privacy coins are trying to do.
But that's why I mentioned the systems of like automated instant liquidity, because we don't have that languages. It'll be the case that like you had like a Star Trek style thing. Do you think those languages would disappear, or they would just? No,
I guess in the language analogy they do disappear, but in the coin analogy, does it really ever die? Well, you know, it effectively can go to such non-usage where it's almost dead for all intents and purposes. But what I am saying is that it won't go beyond the niche experimentation category. So they can all exist. I mean, you know, there's something out there called pot coin, which you can use to buy pot. So that's not going away. It's just that it has this limited specific purpose. Somebody sent me something for Jesus coin the other day. It's like how to get salvation on the blockchain. So you know, there's always going to be these tokens and coins and atomic swaps. Yeah, they keep that liquidity out there, and that may be the future of the equities market, where you have worldwide, you know, traversable equity tokens that represent equity. But for them to take on the monetary token challenger is a whole different thing. So I actually think in your example with all those coins and tokens and atomic swaps, that's the future for stock equity markets, because we're going to move into an area of jurisdictionless companies. So it'll be easier to raise money as a company without jurisdiction, because when you raise money as a company with jurisdiction, like Hong Kong or London or US, you have all the security rules that you have to go with. If you're a jurisdictionless company where you're only registered in the cloud, you don't have to worry about any of those fundraising, capital raising regulations. So your token has an instant secondary market. So I think it's great for that. But then those are more like company-specific usage tokens, and they will only reinforce the importance of the monetary token, because they're all going to have to go back to a base. So They're always going to be like, you can even see it now. Any of the altcoins that are being traded, they either have their primary quotation market trading pair against Ethereum or against Bitcoin. Because they always have to go back to that base currency.
Bitcoin, in your opinion, then will become the index, the final index for currency. I mean,
well, it already is in the cryptocurrency space. Yeah. So it's the leader, and so anybody else by definition is now a challenger. And just follow market caps.
Yeah, my question is, so you were saying that Bitcoin can't survive without fungibility, essentially, if I'm understanding what you're saying. But the kind of the opposite of that is that governments can't survive without control, because they want to know, like, who's laundering money. They want to know whether terrorist organizations are using money to, operate. So how does that kind of battle get resolved? Because you can see it in, being played out. And often people talk about kind of the battle of Bitcoin, and somehow there's going to be some actual confrontation. But how does that ever get resolved? Because governments don't want to relinquish control. That's what they exist for, and they justify that in many ways. But how are you going to have these two worlds then kind of resolved?
Okay, so on the Poland side, the question is, the desire for government control over the monetary system versus crypto coin fungibility. And the way that I see that playing out is we do have an end to fungibility in the government fiat world, because when it goes through the banking system, there's always a way to trace it, and you can prevent stolen money if you try to wire it out of your HSBC account. So the digital side of the fiat world has already lost its fungibility. The fungibility that exists in the fiat world is in the paper cash side of the fiat world, which still has fungibility, like I said, except for that stupid camera that's taking your ATM picture, which you can, I guess, put a hand over or something. But so that fungibility is still remaining, but the squeeze that's coming is to end paper cash, promoted as a cashless utopia, get people away from paper cash so that there is no possibility for governments not to have the total control like you're asking. But in 2008, the Bitcoin white paper came out to prepare us for an alternative to that future. So you're actually describing the tension that exists between in the crypto arms race. There's not going to be a single clear winner.
Right. There won't be a cataclysmic kind of confrontation, because a lot of the reason the government want control and they're trying to erase cash is to make sure that they maximize the tax
revenue and legal
trading in as well, so that in future when things go wrong, they can just bail people in because they know where all the money is. No one can have it under their mattress. And
exactly.
I just wonder if there's this. So there's going to be a point of conflict, or.
But that is the battle that I'm describing as the crypto arms race between the privacy wallets and the blockchain forensics people. The traceable cryptocurrency team and the privacy wallet team are clashing like two planets clashing, like you're saying, and that tension is always going to exist. I think it'll morph into different things, but it's not ever going to end. It's it's like saying that the nuclear arms race is going to end.
There'll just be a shifting kind of power dynamic that some might go in some different direction, but governments will still be governments. It's not this thing about people talk about Bitcoin, like I said, being libertarian, and the future is going to be I have control over everything.
Well, that's what I believe, except when I was describing the parallel economy, you will be able to opt out of the mainstream system, and you'll be able to operate and live in the parallel economy. So because you can opt out, you'll be able to choose, that level of freedom, or that level of that world that you want to exist in. You don't have to stay in the other world. So you'll have that choice.
I think that'd be difficult. I mean, I was reading this week about how the HMRC over here have issued their guidance around tax liabilities, and that kind of trying a lot of people, because it's hold on a minute, I got into Bitcoin and crypto because I don't want anything to do with that. Now you're telling me that I earn capital gains on any transaction, and it sounded so complex that it's like that thing colliding.
Okay, let me answer that, but I'll repeat the question for Poland. Is the question is about the tax laws, and not just in income tax, but in reporting tax on capital gains around cryptocurrencies. And the thing about that question is that I'm not saying that taxes are going to go away, even though I am a libertarian and I would like minimal taxation. I don't think that they're going away. And cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin don't make taxes go away. But what they will do, and the reason they don't make them go away is because you can always have, at the end of the day, you know, an armed agent that goes up to your house and they don't take your money, they'll take something else. Bitcoin will change the form of taxation though. So what we'll see in the future is we'll see less and less dependence on income tax and more dependence on consumption-based taxation. So we'll shift from income to consumption-based taxes. In the United States, they didn't even tax income before 1913. I don't know when it started in the UK, but you know, it's an offensive form of taxation because it discourages productivity and more work. So you know, the world doesn't end if income tax goes away. It's just that other tax revenue streams have to take its place. And with cryptocurrencies, it's so much easier from a government perspective to tax consumption, especially physical consumption at stores, than it is to tax income, because as more and more growth into the informal economy and more direction from medium of exchange to unit of account, more people getting paid in Bitcoin, reporting your income is going to be the same. It's going to be like the honor system, the way that waiters and waitresses are paid in the US with tips at restaurants. Whether or not those waiters and waitresses report that income on their IRS form is largely based on an honor system of how many tips they received by waiting on that table. Now, I know people in the food service business, and I know that the compliance rate there is like 2%. You know, people are not saying that they got this tip income and paying taxes on it. So because the compliance rate based on a self-reporting honor system for income, if it evolves that way, income taxes will be harder to enforce, and governments will have no choice to shift to consumption-based form of taxation. So the bad news is that VAT is going on.
Right. But you're
but income tax will go away.
Yeah, the 2 trillion you mentioned of the black economy that exists globally, if that was taxed now, that would realize huge benefits. You know, where people say, oh, we don't want to introduce kind of crypto, but you're saying, well, actually, the benefit would be you're taxing what is now a kind of black tax.
Yeah, but that's why I think that we're going to jurisdictionless companies, because those merchants are in physical meat space. If you go to the digital world, how do you tax a company that doesn't have a place?
Right.
It's like trying to tax piratebay.org. I don't even know how they stay online.
What's the
Yes.
question about fungibility? Because one of the things that I think crypto uses quite a lot about things like transaction fees.
Please, yeah.
Yeah, but if I give Ben 20 quid and I had to throw away a pound every time I do it, as a user, I think that's like it's not the best use of my funds or kind of what I own. So I guess, do you think transaction fees are the best way to sustain the network, or is it something that should be abandoned?
Well, transaction fees should not be abandoned. It's just that every single transaction in the world may not be able to justify the fee that it will cost to be placed on the main chain. I mean, we're so early right now in this entire environment that you can still do a Bitcoin transaction right now for you know, under 50 cents. You know, there's some peak periods of stress where that's not available to you, but I don't think transaction fees should go away. I think that there's a lot of economic research on how the transaction fees will replace the reward that the miners receive from generating blocks. So as the mining fee revenue goes down, the transaction fee revenue goes up, so that we'll be able to maintain the same hash rate. That's the theory. It hasn't been tested in practice yet, and the reason it hasn't been tested in practice yet is because all of the Bitcoins won't be issued until the year 2140. And we're not even going to be around then. So by the year 2032, which is what, in like 13 years? 2032 is when 99% of all the Bitcoins will be issued. So for that means there's still block rewards that are coming too. So we don't even have to worry about transitioning to transaction fees only to support the network until 2032 or beyond. So it was designed to get a start and a foothold in the market to be able to address that. But no, I don't think they should go away. Quite the contrary. I think they should be, made to be efficient. They're going to drive a lot of efficiencies in the system. But between 2032 and 2140, the curve slopes off to be so flat that that's when the last 1% of Bitcoin is issued. So, to get to the 21 million. So to get to 21 million, what's 1% of 21 million? 2100, I guess. So that last 1%, it takes 108 years. So I'll finish the talk today with some other fun statistic that you can use at family dinners. Okay, if people are talking to you about Bitcoin, now you know how to tell them why Bitcoin has a price. Now you know when to tell them to buy because it's when XBT comes around. But you still don't know how to tell them how much to buy. And the answer to how much to buy is they need to buy 21. If you can work your way up to own just 21 Bitcoin in your own name, which today isn't even that much money now, compared to what it was last year.
Yeah.
So 21 Bitcoin. And the reason that you want to own 21 Bitcoin is because you'll be 1 in a million in the world. There's only 1 million people in the world where it's mathematically possible for them to own 21 Bitcoin. So now you won't just be the 1% of the world, the 1%ers from Occupy Wall Street. You'll be the 0.1%. But 21 Bitcoin is a good personal goal. You can probably stop right there. You can probably stop at 10 if you want, but that would be the advice to them. Owning 210 Bitcoin is you're one of the top 100,000 people in the world. And it's just math. All right, so thanks very much. I enjoyed it, and I'm all ready for next week now.